Today we're going to continue our analysis of Catcher in the Rye, and we're starting with Chapter 12, and we'll go through Chapter 19 today. So again, things continue to get darker, and there seems to be more tension as we continue through the text. So Holden is talking to Horowitz about fish versus ducks, and Horowitz is like, there's no difference, and Holden's like, of course there is. And something that we're going to continue to see, and something that we've been seeing throughout the text, is that Holden cannot connect with people. He's lonely, he's isolated, he's trying to reach people, but he just keeps failing, and it makes him want to retreat more into himself and become more cynical. I think we've all had that experience when we're trying to connect to someone and communicate clearly, and it just doesn't work. But to have that happen so frequently with so many different people must be challenging. Holden complains that people always clap for the wrong things, so society celebrates the things it shouldn't, which I think what's interesting about this text is Holden makes a lot of good points, but not in terms of what he's actually criticizing. Yes, people can celebrate things that don't need to be celebrated, but sometimes his perspective of what they're celebrating should be. So it's just kind of interesting how he points that out. Again, he thinks Ernie is phony, gives a phony bow because he's a snob. So he's not humble in bowing to the crowd. So he's being a phony. But that's also part of, a gig and performing is you bow. He also criticizes Ivy Leagues. People who go to Ivy Leagues, he says, all those Ivy League bastards look alike. Now you have to wonder, would Holden have that opinion if he hadn't flunked out of so many schools? If he did well, if they were a place of success for him, would he criticize people who went to Ivy Leagues because going to Penn State Prep and other prep schools that he's flunked out of, that's what his parents were training him for? So that's rather interesting. And again, Holden says, I'm always saying, glad to have met you, to somebody I'm not at all glad I met. If you want to stay alive, you have to say that stuff, though. So he's talking about etiquette and being polite. And he, again, has a cynical view of it because he's basically saying that he's lying to people on purpose because that's what society deems to be the appropriate thing to do. However, it is nice to be polite, and it does help you network and get you places. So he's not seeing the purpose of it, but sometimes the payoff comes later, or sometimes people just pay it forward and you might not ever see the payoff, but it's still nice to be kind to others. That's my soapbox for hopefully this section, and hopefully there won't be any more soapboxes. So chapter 13, I believe this is the chapter that gets rather racy. It might be the next chapter, though. I think it's this chapter. So he goes back to his hotel. He's by himself, so it's the absent parent trope, which means he can make mistakes. And there's a lot of tension in this chapter regarding sexuality. And so someone asks him, are you interested in a little tale tonight? Which is slang for a sexual encounter from the elevator guy. Holden lies about his age. We're not surprised. And he basically says, okay, and the elevator guy will send someone up in 15 minutes. So Holden says, I was starting to feel pretty sexy and all, but I was a little nervous anyway. If you want to know the truth, I'm a virgin. I really am. I've had quite a few opportunities to lose my virginity and all, but I've never gotten around to it yet. So again, this goes back to the previous video that we watched where why is Holden still a virgin? Of course, it's fine to be a virgin. I'm not saying it's not. But what are his reasons? Is it because he's an innocent? and he's not ready to transition into adulthood, which some people argue once you hit puberty, you're transitioning to adulthood. Others believe it's after 18 or when you move out of your parents' house. There's so many different markers for what constitutes being an adult. So that could be something you write about in your essay, like what does it mean to be an adult? Because I think a lot of us feel like we're faking it until we reach a certain age, maybe. Although I think my mom told me that she didn't really feel like she was an adult until she was 50. So I mostly feel like an adult, but sometimes it's like, what am I doing? Anyhow, so is it the tension between innocence and adulthood that he remains a virgin? Is it that he's a closeted homosexual, which makes him uncomfortable? Or is it that he just doesn't connect with people very well, which makes him hesitate to be intimate with someone? Or is he asexual? So there's tons of reasons that we could look for. We would just need to find evidence in the actual text and quotes. That's why your English teachers are always saying, show me the evidence, give me the page number, give me the citation, right? Because we want your proof. We want to see how you're analyzing those specific words and sentences. So then she comes in. She asks his age, and he says he's 22, and she's like, nope. He lies about his name as well. He asks her for a cigarette, even though she doesn't smoke. She comes from Hollywood, and it seems like he just wants to talk. And he says he'll pay her, he just doesn't want to do anything. He finds her depressing. Her green dress hanging in the closet and all. That's something kind of interesting. Colors do have symbolic meaning, especially according to culture, and green is the color of innocence. Now, the prostitute is not innocent, but Holden is. However, why would Salinger make that dress for the prostitute green instead of Holden's clothing green? So there's some tension there. Why is that? She sits on his lap. He's getting nervous because sexuality makes him nervous. Intimacy makes him nervous. Then they start arguing about money. He says 5, she says 10. And he didn't thank her. And that's how the chapter ends, and he feels fine with that. So her name was Sunny, and now we're in chapter 14. He felt miserable, and he says, what I did, I started talking sort of out loud to Allie. I do that sometimes when I get very depressed. So we know that he's going downhill right now, emotionally, and he's speaking to his brother. And by talking to his deceased brother, again, it's a reminder that this death was significant to him. It's changed his personality and how he views things. So that's kind of an example of close reading. Like, why mention Allie right now? Why talk to him? Especially after quarantine or during quarantine, I think maybe not all of us, but a lot of us said things out loud. Like, I would be walking around the house and say, like, oh, I need to empty the trash or something. And I'd say it out loud, even though no one was around or I wasn't speaking to anyone else in particular. So people do that all the time. That doesn't mean that they're depressed or that they have some kind of personality issue. But he's specifically speaking to Allie. And it's when he's depressed and it's when he's going downhill. So that could connect to the fact that when Allie dies, that's when his depression begins, and that's why he goes back to his brother, or it could be something completely different. Who knows? So, and then he says, I can't always pray when I feel like it. In the first place, I'm sort of an atheist. Okay, so again, Holden is contradictory. He points it out, but does he truly see it in himself? If he's sort of an atheist, why would he even attempt to pray? Then he talks about religion, and he criticizes the disciples, which is rather interesting. Like, why bring up religion right now? Some people, when they get depressed, they go to Psalm 23, the Valley of Death, which if you want to look that up, you can and see the text. So that is something you could look at, that when some people get depressed, they turn to their faith and spirituality. Am I preaching that you should be religious or spiritual? No. I'm just saying some people do that. And that appears to be what Holden is doing, even though he's a self-proclaimed sort of atheist. Which was really controversial to say when this was published, which I have to get the exact date, 1945. Even now, it's controversial to talk about your religious beliefs if not many people say them aloud, although atheism is growing in the United States. But still, people criticize everything, as Holden has pointed out. And here then in this chapter, he also writes, in the first place, my parents are different religions, and all the children in our family are atheists. So he continues talking about that. If you remember going back to the contextual information that we provided at the beginning of this unit, we know that J.D. Salinger's parents were also different religions. So this is one example for why it's important to know some of the author's life and some of the contextual history of a text, because I think it's kind of difficult for an author to wholly divorce him or herself from the text that they're writing. And so you can see that's something from Salinger's life that we see in the text. So he's getting in an argument about $5. Holden wants them to get out of their room. Sunny, the prostitute, just wants to get the wallet. Holden says, don't. She just takes the money. She says she's not a crook. And then he starts crying. And he says, you're stealing $5. Maurice gets mad, shoves him, and he's still kind of crying. Holden is like, and that's kind of a kid thing to do, or it's just like he doesn't know how to deal with the real world. His innocent perspective of the world is that it's a good, beautiful place, and this is showing him something quite different, and it's juxtaposed or right next to sexuality. So does that mean sexuality is an ugly thing for him? Or is it too real and too disturbing for him? And again, why would it be like that? Why are those two things being together like that, you know? So it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition. And then he gets punched in the stomach. He stays on the floor. He feels like he's drowning, so it was probably something towards the lungs. He went to the bathroom, wasn't tired. And then he writes towards the end of chapter 14, what I really felt like, though, was committing suicide. I didn't want to, I felt like jumping out of the window. I probably would have done it, too, if I had been sure somebody'd cover me up as soon as I landed. I didn't want a bunch of stupid rubbernecks looking at me when I was all gory. A lot of teenagers feel depressed and anxious, especially after the difficult time we've had with the pandemic and quarantine. I think that's exacerbated or made the situation worse for a lot of teenagers. But suicidal tendencies and thoughts seem to begin around your sophomore year of high school and end, hopefully, around your sophomore year of college. And so Holden's experiencing that now, and it confirms why he's in the psychiatric ward, because he's even contemplating ways of committing suicide, and he doesn't have any reliable adult to talk to or any friend who really understands him so that they can help talk him down, calm him down, or get him the help he needs. The only thing that's stopping him is he doesn't want people looking at him when he looks gross, which is kind of a superficial thing to think about. And the reason I pointed that out is because he finds a bunch of other people to be superficial. Again, he's not seeing hypocrisy. And I think this is why some people don't like Holden, because he can be hypocritical. Whereas other people relate to him a lot because we're all hypocritical in different ways, right? So, but again, this is kind of a downhill spiral. And if you've read Paradise Lost, which I doubt you guys have in this class, but you know hopefully the story of Adam and Eve, which is what Paradise Lost is about. And they're in paradise, then they eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge, and then they're cast out of paradise. And so it's the fall. And there's a lot of books and novels and stories that kind of track that fall, where you have this amazing person, although Holden never proclaims to be amazing in this text, and then their life just starts going downhill, and it's kind of following in the path of Paradise Lost. So you can kind of see that happening here, except Holden didn't really start in paradise. There were beautiful times in his life, but we don't get to see that directly. He alludes to them and has like mini flashbacks, but they're mostly just memories. So Paradise Lost is amazing. It's an extremely difficult text to read. Even when I was in college, the first time I read it, it was hard to read. I know I read it twice. I'm not sure if I read it more, but it has influenced so many authors and has impacted so many texts, and you can compare Paradise Lost to so many things. Like, I highly recommend it. And it's an epic poem. It's amazing. And controversial at times, too. So hopefully I'm hooking you with this. Maybe not. So now we're on chapter 15. He gives Sally Hayes a buzz or a call on the phone. He says that he finds her to be superficial. And he says, my big trouble is I always sort of think whoever I'm necking is a pretty intelligent person. So I think whenever we like someone or find someone attractive, we have rose-colored glasses on, and then when we're not with them, or if we have a falling out, we can kind of see how they truly are. But he considers her a phony. Then later on in this, or just a few paragraphs down, she says, I loved you, grand. And so way in the beginning of the book, he commented on how grand is a phony word. So this is the second time he's commenting on this, grand. If there's one word I hate, it's grand. It's so phony. And he nearly cancels the date because she uses that one word. So that's kind of interesting. He talks about his father being wealthy, a corporation lawyer. So Holden could have led a sheltered life because his parents are rich, and he definitely has advantages that not everyone has. He doesn't have to worry about how much a hotel room costs. He doesn't have to think about money because he has privilege because his dad makes a lot of money, which is interesting. A lot of texts, particularly maybe not particularly, but a lot of older texts or books in the canon for literature track middle and upper class people. Yes, there are poor people who are in books, but in poetry a lot it's middle and upper classes. And so this book is the same. We're following an upper class kid. So that's kind of an interesting thing if you're doing a comparison between your life and Holden's life, and you want to make that connection to the text. There's maybe a lot of differences between how you were raised and how Holden is raised and your socioeconomic status. Holden complains that he's a light eater. He's so skinny. Let's see. He talks more about books. Return of the Native by Thomas Hardy, 19th century literature. And then, so he's talking, let's see. Yeah, he's talking about books. He's mentioning Beowulf, which is one of the oldest stories that we study in English literature, with Grendel, Romeo and Juliet, Julius Caesar. And the nun gets really excited to talk about Romeo and Juliet. He doesn't really seem to understand that nuns are people too. So they're analyzing literature, they're analyzing Shakespeare. So there are a lot of allusions with an A in this text. And again, we talk about religion. So, like innocent, Adam and Eve were innocent. Holden isn't innocent. Yeah, he's had some experiences, but he lives mostly in that innocent world, and now he's talking to nuns. So there is religion in this text. So if that interests you as a topic, you can write about that too. And he writes, Catholics are always trying to find out if you're a Catholic. As a matter of fact, my father was a Catholic once. He quit, though, when he married my mother. So we know what religion his dad was, and we know his mom is either a Christian or perhaps not in the Christian tradition at all. At the end of chapter 15, he says, "Goddamn money, it always ends up making you blue as hell." And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the aristocracy in England, they're called blue bloods. So blue is a purposeful color there. This is why it's important to know symbols and all those kind of things, because they transfer from text to text. So now we're in chapter 16. And what's really important, let's see, is he's outside, he's walking. I'm on page 128. And he sees a man not walking on the street, but right next to the curb. And this man is singing and humming. Holden gets closer so he can see what he's singing, and he's singing the song, "If a Body Catch a Body Coming Through the Rye." So it's a song, so if you want to Google it and find out what the song is, you can and see what it means. And Holden listens to it, and he says, "It made me feel better. It made me feel not so depressed anymore." And this book is called Catcher in the Rye, so we know this song is going to be important, and Holden's going to make a connection to it later on. Another interesting thing is, I think for teenagers and for a lot of people, when they feel upset, they listen to music. Even my daughter, she'll say, and she's 2.5, she says, "I'm going to play a song to make me feel better." And I know you guys do that too, or you'll listen to a song. So music is kind of his key to be feeling better. He bought 2 orchestra seats for I Know My Love. It was a benefit performance or something. I didn't much want to see it, but I knew old Sally, the queen of the phonies, would start drooling all over the place when I told her I had tickets for that. So even though she's phony and he finds her to be superficial, he's still trying to impress her. Then he starts talking about Phoebe. And he decides to go to the Museum of Natural History, which is what he loved to do as a kid. And he says, and again, this has antiquated language that is not politically correct, so that he refers to Native Americans as Indians, just so you guys know. I get very happy when I think about it. Even now, I remember after we looked at all the Indian stuff, we usually went to see some movie in this big auditorium. Columbus. They were always showing Columbus discovering America, having one hell of a time getting old Ferdinand and Isabella to lend him dough to buy ships with. And then the sailors mutinying on him and all. No one gave too much of a damn about old Columbus, but you always had a lot of candy and gum and stuff with you. So, even through the 90s, the way Columbus was taught was that he came and he found the Americas, that no one knew about this land beforehand, which is not true, obviously. And we now know that Columbus was not this hero, that there were a lot of horrible things that he did. And if you're interested in reading more, there's this great book called Lies My Teacher Told Me, and you can read up on all the atrocious things that he did. So, but in this time period, even when I was a kid, he was hailed as a hero. And Ferdinand and Isabella were the Catholic kings in Spain, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, blah, blah, blah. So they united Spain and they funded his journey. So, yeah, and he says what he likes about the Museum of of natural history is the best thing, though, in that museum was that everything always stayed right where it was. Nobody'd move. Nobody'd be different. The only thing that would be different would be you. And this kind of reminds me of Peter Pan. When you're a child on the brink of a transition to adulthood or puberty, there's a fear, right? Any transition makes us fearful. And he doesn't want to grow up yet, just like Peter Pan. So you could even compare this book to Peter Pan and how, like, different strategies people have to stay a child. Both are 20th century books, too. So yeah, that's kind of chapter 16. Now we're in chapter 17. He doesn't understand guys that never read books. He considers them boring. Have to agree with Holden there. I highly recommend that you guys read for fun every night. So now he's picking up Sally. And she says she looks terrific. The funny part is, I felt like marrying her the minute I saw her. I'm crazy. I didn't even like her much, and yet all of a sudden I felt like I was in love with her and wanted to marry her. I swear to God, I'm crazy. I admit it. So it's kind of like a dream, like, oh, she looks beautiful. That's kind of the dream. I'll marry her. He knows he's on the brink of needing a lot of help for his depression and anxiety. Like, something's got to give, basically. And he admits that he's crazy, but he doesn't explain why, which is, again, interesting. And then he says, if a girl looks swell when she meets you, who gives a damn if she's late? Nobody. And there's a cliche that women are late when they're getting ready. Later on, he says, or on page 139, just to show you how crazy I am, when we were coming out of this big glitch, I told her I loved her and all. It was a lie, of course, because he's unreliable and a liar. But the thing is, I meant it when I said it. I'm crazy. I swear to God I am. And then she says, oh, darling, I love you too. And then she wants him to grow his hair out. She wants to fix him. So he says he's crazy within 2 pages. So you know things are getting pretty dark for him. He talks about phonies. And he already sort of hates old Sally by the time they get in the cab, because they had to listen to someone else talk and it was a phony conversation. They decide to go ice skating. He talks about a nervous habit of lighting matches and letting them burn until he can't hold them anymore. So it shows that he's anxious. He says that boys' schools are full of phonies. No surprise there. They get into a fight, and she starts crying. And then he starts laughing at her, which makes her madder than ever. He doesn't even know why he started the fight. He wanted to take her somewhere remote and isolated, and J.D. Salinger was kind of isolated. He's totally disconnected with what she wants in life versus what he wants. He knows that he wouldn't want to actually go with her, but he meant it when he said it. And he says, I swear to God, I'm a madman. Again, this is the 3rd time in one chapter that he's like, I'm going crazy. So we're in chapter 18. He mentions the Rockettes kicking their legs off, or their heads off, which you can still see the Rockettes today. He alludes to Charles Dickens and Oliver Twist. Oliver Twist is an orphan. So the absent parent trope, adventure, finding himself, finding his identity. Who is he really? Who were his parents he didn't know? So it's, again, connected to Catcher in the Rye. So all of these allusions come into play and add layers of richness, like layers on a canvas if you're painting. he talks about poets, Rupert Burke or Emily Dickinson. He read A Farewell to Arms, The Great Gatsby, which we'll be reading as well later this year. Emily Dickinson was also rather a recluse. She has a lot of poems on death as well. So all of these things kind of connect. And then Holden ends this chapter by talking about the atomic bomb. If there's ever another war, I'm going to sit right the hell on top of it. I'll volunteer for it. I swear to God, I will. So again, those are suicidal thoughts. So he's in a very dark place. There's this tension between him wanting to be an innocent and his depression getting the best of him. He can't even really fathom reality at this point. So not even just like regular adulthood. It just seems to be those two extremes. Talks about phonies in the beginning of chapter 19, so we're on chapter 19 now. He's talking to old Luce. And Luce doesn't want to answer Holden's questions. He's trying to connect with Luce again. And he asks him, when in the hell are you going to grow up? So he's directly calling Holden out, saying he's too immature. He's an innocent. And they start talking about women, philosophy, but Luce starts talking about sex, and Holden's trying to like learn more about it from him. But Luce is like, no, this is weird. I don't want to do that. He was getting a little too personal, I realized. And Luce even says, naturally, your mind is immature. And Holden's like, it is. It really is. I know it. And so, yeah, Holden is trying to learn about sexuality, but he doesn't have a good, reliable guide. But the only thing Holden takes from him is that he had a good vocabulary. So again, he's trying to connect with people. He's lonely. He's isolated, and he can't really seem to do anything about it. And he's not getting the answers that he needs. So, that was a big section, but now we are through chapter 19.